My husband threw me a surprise divorce party on our anniversary, complete with a cake that read, "Finally free." His friends cheered as he handed me papers saying, "Consider this your graduation from being a burden." I thanked everyone graciously and signed immediately. While they celebrated, I signed something that would make their cheers sound like a distant memory. I stood in the rain outside St. Catherine's Cemetery, watching my husband Raymond arrange white roses on his mother's grave with the same theatrical precision he used during board meetings. Even in grief he performed. The way he tilted his head just so, the calculated pause before speaking, the tremor in his voice that appeared exactly when photographers might be watching. It was all choreography. "She would have been so proud of what we've built together," he said, his words carrying across the empty cemetery. But we both knew the truth. There was no we in what had been built. There was only me working in shadows while he claimed the spotlight. That morning had begun like every other in our marble-floored penthouse. Sunlight streamed through the French windows, casting golden patterns across surfaces that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. I moved through our home with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to make elegance look effortless. Fresh orchids needed adjusting in the foyer. My reflection required one final check before the charity luncheon where Raymond would once again take credit for innovations I had created in the depths of Victoria's Table's kitchen. The routine had become suffocating. Each elegant gesture felt like another bar in the gilded cage I had unknowingly constructed around myself. I was no longer Victoria the entrepreneur, the creative force behind our restaurant empire's success. I had become Victoria the wife, the beautiful accessory that made Raymond appear more sophisticated, more complete. But standing in that cemetery watching him perform even for his dead mother, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't grief. This was another presentation, another opportunity for Raymond to demonstrate his supposed depth of character. I realized that our entire marriage had been nothing more than his most ambitious business venture, marrying the woman who could build his empire while allowing him to claim ownership of her vision. The memory of my father Logan's warnings flooded back with uncomfortable clarity. 3 years ago, in his oak-paneled study that smelled of leather and old whiskey, he had insisted on that unusual prenuptial clause. 65% of assets if Raymond initiated divorce or committed adultery. Logan's weathered hands had gripped his crystal tumbler as he explained his instinctive distrust of charming men who married for advancement rather than love. "Victoria," he had said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in business, "men like Raymond see opportunity where others see romance. Promise me you'll sign this." At 26, I had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned paranoia. I trusted Raymond completely, believed in the fairy tale we were crafting together. My father's protectiveness felt insulting, as if he thought I couldn't recognize genuine love when I found it. The night before our wedding, as I sat in my childhood bedroom surrounded by white silk and tomorrow's promises, I had decided to review the contract one final time, to understand exactly what I was agreeing to protect myself against. But when morning came, the papers had vanished. Raymond dismissed my concerns with that charming laugh that had first drawn me to him at a wine tasting 3 years earlier. "Lawyers and their paperwork," he said, adjusting his tie in our bedroom mirror with the same meticulous care he brought to everything in his life. "Don't worry, darling. We have forever to sort out the details." Forever. The word tasted bitter now as I watched him straighten the roses with geometric precision. How naive I had been to believe that a man who calculated every gesture, every word, every public appearance would leave something as important as financial protection to chance. The disappearing prenuptial agreement hadn't been an accident. It had been strategy. While Raymond spent his days networking at industry events and posing for business magazine covers that featured our restaurants, I spent countless nights in Victoria's Table's kitchen with Marcus Thompson, our head chef. Together, we redesigned menus that transformed our single restaurant into the culinary destination it had become. I negotiated supplier contracts that ensured quality while maintaining profit margins. I analyzed customer feedback and created the signature wine pairings that food critics raved about in their reviews. Every innovation, every creative breakthrough, every strategic decision that built our success, I documented it all in detailed journals I kept hidden in our home office. The sustainable sourcing programs that attracted environmentally conscious customers. The staff training protocols that created the exceptional service experience our patrons expected. The seasonal menu rotations that kept food bloggers returning month after month. My fingerprints were on every aspect of our empire, yet I remained deliberately invisible. I had convinced myself this arrangement was temporary, that eventually Raymond would acknowledge my contributions publicly. But as months turned to years, I realized he had no intention of sharing credit. In his mind, I was the supportive wife who provided input, not the architect who had designed our success from foundation to finish. The irony was exquisite. While Raymond charmed investors and posed for photographs, I was building relationships with suppliers who respected my expertise, cultivating connections with industry professionals who valued my insights, creating systems and processes that could scale our concept into the multi-location empire I envisioned. Yet when business publications wanted to profile our success story, Raymond was always the sole subject, the visionary entrepreneur who had built something extraordinary. Standing in that cemetery watching Raymond's performance reach its crescendo with a perfectly timed moment of silent reflection, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who had spent 3 years making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating was awakening to a truth I had been avoiding. This marriage wasn't partnership. It was exploitation dressed in wedding silk and sealed with promises that Raymond had never intended to keep. The rain began falling harder, and Raymond glanced toward our car with the same calculating expression he wore when deciding whether to stay at a networking event or move on to a more profitable opportunity. Even his grief had a time limit, a point at which the performance stopped being worth the effort. "We should go," he said, his voice already shifting back to its normal tone, the theatrical tremor disappearing like makeup washed away. "The car will be soaked if we wait much longer." As we walked back through the cemetery gates, Raymond's phone buzzed with what I assumed were business calls, congratulations on our latest restaurant review, or meeting requests from potential investors. He smiled as he read each message, that satisfied expression he wore when things were proceeding according to his plans. But I was beginning to understand that Raymond's plans had never included me as an equal partner. I was a resource to be managed, a talent to be harvested, a reputation to be borrowed when convenient and discarded when no longer useful. The prenuptial agreement that had mysteriously disappeared represented more than missing paperwork. It represented the moment Raymond had decided that his success mattered more than my security, his ambitions more than my trust. The rain continued falling as we reached our car, and I realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside me. The drive home from the cemetery passed in silence, Raymond absorbed in his phone while I stared out the rain-streaked window. By the time we pulled into our driveway, the storm had intensified, turning the November evening dark and cold. Raymond hurried inside without waiting for me, already focused on whatever messages had been demanding his attention throughout our somber afternoon. I followed more slowly, my heels clicking against the wet marble of our entryway. Something felt different about the house, though I couldn't identify what had shifted. Maybe it was me. Maybe the conversation with myself in that cemetery had changed how I saw everything, including the home we shared. Raymond disappeared immediately into his study, claiming urgent business calls that couldn't wait. I heard his voice through the closed door, animated and engaged in ways it never was when we discussed our restaurant or our future together. The contrast struck me as I stood alone in our vast living room, surrounded by furniture we had chosen together but somehow felt entirely his. The next morning brought my scheduled supplier meeting, a routine negotiation with our produce vendors that Raymond rarely bothered attending. These meetings were beneath his notice, too operational for someone who preferred the glamour of investor lunches and industry conferences. I drove across town to the warehouse district, spending 2 hours reviewing quality standards and seasonal pricing with Maria Santos, who had been supplying our restaurants since we opened. "Your husband doesn't understand food the way you do," Maria said as we examined samples of winter vegetables. "When he comes here he talks about costs. When you come, you talk about customers, about creating something special." Her observation lingered with me during the drive home. Raymond did think about costs, about profit margins and efficiency metrics. But he never thought about the experience we were creating, the memories we were helping people build around our tables. That vision had always been mine. I returned home earlier than expected, the meeting concluding faster than scheduled. The house felt empty as I entered, Raymond's car absent from the driveway. He must have left for one of his networking events, the kind where he would charm potential investors while taking credit for innovations I had developed in our kitchen. His phone lay forgotten on the granite kitchen counter, buzzing insistently with incoming messages. Raymond never went anywhere without that device. He treated it like an extension of his arm, constantly checking emails and text messages that he claimed were crucial to our business success. The buzzing continued and I glanced at the screen. Multiple notifications from someone named Sophia, Marketing Director, filled the display. I didn't recognize the name, though Raymond frequently met with marketing consultants and brand specialists. The messages seemed urgent, the preview text hinting at time-sensitive plans and scheduling conflicts. I picked up the phone intending to call Raymond and let him know he had left it behind. But the screen unlocked automatically, revealing the full conversation thread with this Sophia person. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The messages chronicled months of intimate dinners at restaurants I didn't recognize, weekend getaways to coastal hotels where Raymond claimed to be attending business conferences. Detailed plans for a future that seemed to exist in some parallel universe where I didn't exist at all. My hands began trembling as I scrolled through conversations that painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive it felt surreal. Sophia wrote about that naive little wife, who apparently had no idea what was happening in her own marriage. Raymond responded with relief about the prenuptial agreement no longer existing, both of them assuming I had signed away my protection on our wedding night 3 years ago. They discussed timing, logistics, and strategies for Raymond's eventual divorce filing as if it were a business transaction requiring careful planning and execution. The phone slipped from my shaking fingers, clattering against the granite counter. The sound echoed through our empty house like a gunshot. I stared at the device, its screen still glowing with evidence of Raymond's systematic deception, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I had always prided myself on being perceptive, on reading people and situations with the intuition that made me successful in business. But I had been completely blind to what was happening in my own home with my own husband. The man I had trusted completely had been planning my destruction while I built his empire. That night, after Raymond returned home with apologies about forgetting his phone and excuses about unexpected client meetings, I waited until he fell asleep before making my way to his private study. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, filled with awards and photographs that celebrated his supposed business acumen. I had never searched through Raymond's personal papers before. Our marriage had been built on trust, or so I had believed. But trust was apparently a luxury I could no longer afford. I began methodically, examining file cabinets and desk drawers with surgical precision. Raymond was organized to a fault, everything labeled and categorized according to his exacting standards. Financial documents occupied the bottom drawer of his antique mahogany desk, arranged in folders that chronicled our business growth and personal investments. Behind the financial files, tucked into a false panel I discovered by accident when the drawer stuck, lay documents I had never seen before. The original prenuptial agreement my father had insisted upon, bearing only Raymond's signature. My name remained unsigned on every page, exactly as I remembered from our wedding night when I had decided to review the contract one final time. But that wasn't the worst discovery. Manila folders contained bank statements from accounts in the Cayman Islands, property investments made solely in Raymond's name, and correspondence about business opportunities he had never mentioned to me. At the bottom of the stack lay a formal proposal to sell Victoria's Table to a hotel conglomerate, complete with financial projections and transition timelines. Every page represented another layer of calculated betrayal. Raymond hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been systematically positioning himself to abandon our marriage and steal the business empire I had built, leaving me with nothing but whatever divorce settlement his missing prenuptial agreement might provide. I sat in his leather chair, surrounded by evidence of his deceptions, and felt the warmth in my chest replaced by something cold and calculating. The woman who had spent 3 years making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating was finally seeing her situation with complete clarity. Raymond had never seen me as a partner. I was a resource to be exploited, a talent to be harvested until it was no longer useful. The restaurant empire we had supposedly built together was actually something I had created while he took credit and planned his exit strategy. I photographed each document with methodical precision, ensuring every detail was captured clearly. Then I returned everything to its hiding place, leaving no trace of my discovery. Raymond would wake tomorrow morning believing his secrets remained safe, unaware that his wife had finally seen through his carefully constructed facade. The next evening found me at Victoria's table later than usual, conducting inventory with Marcus Thompson in the quiet kitchen after service had ended. Marcus had worked with me since our opening, his weathered hands crafting the dishes I designed with the skill of someone who understood food as art rather than mere commerce. "Mrs. Victoria," he said, pausing over wine inventory sheets, "we all know who really runs this place." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to acknowledge. "If you ever need anything," he continued quietly, "documentation, testimony, whatever you might require, you have our complete loyalty." I looked into his honest face and realized that everyone except me had been seeing the truth about my marriage, my business, and my husband's true character. The entire staff had been quietly protecting the restaurant from Raymond's incompetent directives, following my guidance while documenting his absences and increasingly erratic decision-making. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. Marcus's words stayed with me through the sleepless hours that followed. The knowledge that my staff had been protecting the restaurant from Raymond's incompetence while documenting his failures provided an unexpected sense of validation. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining the extent of his deceptions. Other people saw it too. But recognition wasn't enough. I needed a plan. The next 6 months became a masterclass in strategic deception. Each morning, I woke beside the man who was systematically betraying me and performed the role of devoted wife with an expertise that surprised even me. I attended board meetings where Raymond presented my sustainable sourcing initiatives as his environmental consciousness breakthrough, nodding supportively while photographing his presentation slides for my growing evidence file. The monthly investor luncheons became particularly surreal theatrical productions. Raymond would guide potential partners through Victoria's table, explaining the kitchen workflow I had designed, the staff training protocols I had developed, and the customer experience standards I had implemented. He spoke with such conviction about his innovations that I sometimes wondered if he had convinced himself the ideas were originally his. "Victoria has been invaluable in helping me execute these concepts," he would say, gesturing toward me with the patronizing smile reserved for appreciated assistants. The investors would nod politely in my direction before returning their attention to the man they believed was the visionary behind our success. Every false smile I offered during these presentations became part of my larger strategy. Every supportive gesture was carefully calculated to maintain Raymond's confidence while building my case. I learned to perform gratitude for the credit he stole, to appear grateful for the platform he provided to showcase his business acumen. The hardest moments came during private conversations with Raymond's family, particularly his sister Rebecca, who had always treated me with barely concealed condescension. She would compliment Raymond's business brilliance during holiday dinners while dismissing my contributions as helpful support for his vision. "You're so lucky to have married someone with Raymond's entrepreneurial spirit," she told me during Thanksgiving dinner, her words carrying an edge that suggested I should be grateful for the opportunity to witness his success. I smiled and agreed, all while knowing that Raymond's entrepreneurial spirit consisted primarily of taking credit for work he couldn't have conceived himself. My relationship with Isabella Rodriguez developed gradually through what appeared to be casual encounters at industry events. She was a venture capitalist who specialized in hospitality investments, someone Raymond had tried unsuccessfully to court for months. Her initial interest in our business had waned after meeting with Raymond, whose inability to discuss operational details beyond surface-level marketing speak had failed to impress her. But Isabella noticed me at a restaurant industry conference, recognizing me from articles where I appeared beside Raymond in photographs. When she approached me during a networking break, her questions focused on details Raymond never bothered learning. "The seasonal menu rotations at Victoria's table show remarkable sophistication," she said over coffee near the conference venue. "The wine pairings demonstrate someone with genuine understanding of flavor profiles and customer psychology." I found myself discussing aspects of our business that I rarely had opportunities to explore with anyone outside our kitchen staff. Isabella listened with the focused attention of someone who recognized expertise when she encountered it. Our conversations evolved into monthly lunches at competitor restaurants, ostensibly research visits to analyze market trends. Isabella would ask detailed questions about sourcing strategies, staff development approaches, and customer retention techniques that Raymond had never shown interest in understanding. She studied successful restaurants the way I did, looking for innovations that could be adapted and improved rather than simply admiring surface aesthetics. "You have the mind of a true restaurateur," Isabella told me during one of our meetings at a farm-to-table establishment across town. "Most people in this industry focus on ambience and marketing. You understand the fundamentals that create sustainable success." Her words carried weight that Raymond's praise never possessed. Isabella had built her reputation by identifying genuine talent and supporting entrepreneurs who could execute complex visions. When she offered capital support for future endeavors, I knew she was investing in abilities she had personally evaluated rather than believing second-hand claims about my potential. Meanwhile, my conversations with Marcus Thompson revealed the extent of the staff's quiet resistance to Raymond's leadership. The entire restaurant operated according to systems I had established, with employees following my guidance while diplomatically ignoring Raymond's contradictory directives. "We keep detailed records of everything," Marcus explained during one of our late-evening inventory sessions. "When Mr. Raymond contradicts your instructions, we document the conversation and then follow your original guidance. When he suggests menu changes that would compromise quality, we record his suggestions and then explain why they wouldn't work." Patricia, our sommelier, had been particularly thorough in documenting Raymond's ignorance about wine selections. She maintained logs of instances where he couldn't identify basic varietals, conversations where he demonstrated fundamental misunderstanding of pairing principles, and meetings where he attempted to override her professional recommendations based on cost considerations that ignored customer experience implications. The servers had their own documentation system, recording Raymond's inability to explain menu items he supposedly created, his tendency to make promises about service capabilities that exceeded our actual capacity, and his habit of blaming staff for problems that resulted from his own operational ignorance. This collective documentation created an ironclad case for my true role in Victoria's Table's success. The staff wasn't just loyal to me personally, they were protecting the professional standards that made their workplace successful and sustainable. Working with my attorney Robert, I began the process of legally protecting the intellectual property I had developed throughout our marriage. The unique food preparation techniques I had created with Marcus, the signature recipes that distinguished our menu from competitors, the proprietary management systems that ensured consistent service quality. All of these innovations needed formal protection under my name. Robert approached each filing methodically, ensuring we could document that my innovations preceded any claims Raymond might make. The development journals I had maintained provided crucial evidence of creation dates and evolution processes. Email correspondence with suppliers, notes from staff training sessions and customer feedback analysis all supported my ownership of the systems that made Victoria's Table successful. These patent applications will create legal clarity about intellectual property ownership, Robert explained during one of our strategy sessions. If Raymond attempts to claim these innovations during divorce proceedings, we can demonstrate conclusively that they originated with your work and expertise. Each legal filing represented another wall in the fortress I was building around my professional achievements. Raymond believed he owned an empire built on his vision and leadership. He would eventually discover that everything he considered his property had always legally belonged to the woman whose contributions he had systematically minimized. The trademark registrations for our signature dishes and proprietary service protocols created additional layers of protection. If Raymond attempted to replicate our concepts at future restaurants, he would discover that the innovations he claimed as his own were legally protected under someone else's name. The licensing agreements for our management systems provided the most comprehensive protection. Every operational improvement I had developed, every efficiency protocol I had implemented, every training methodology I had created could be documented and protected as proprietary business intelligence belonging to me personally rather than our joint enterprise. As winter transformed into spring, my double life became increasingly sophisticated. During the day, I played the supportive wife who facilitated Raymond's public success. During the evening, I worked with attorneys, accountants, and industry professionals who recognized and valued my actual capabilities. The contrast between these two worlds grew more stark with each passing month. In Raymond's world, I was the helpful spouse who provided input when requested. In the professional world I was constructing for myself, I was the innovative restaurateur whose expertise commanded respect and investment interest. Raymond remained completely unaware of my evening activities, confident that his wife spent her free time reading design magazines and planning social events. His arrogance made him incurious about details of my daily schedule, assuming that my life revolved entirely around supporting his ambitions and managing household responsibilities. This assumption would prove to be one of his most costly miscalculations. Raymond's miscalculations were about to become more costly than he could possibly imagine. But first he needed to execute what he believed would be his masterstroke of psychological warfare. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning in late spring, delivered by courier in an envelope of cream-colored paper so thick it felt luxurious between my fingers. The embossed gold lettering announced, "An evening of celebration," without specifying what exactly we would be celebrating. I assumed it represented another charity gala or perhaps a business anniversary requiring my presence as Raymond's supportive wife. The timing struck me as odd. Raymond usually coordinated our social calendar weeks in advance, ensuring maximum networking potential from every event we attended. This invitation felt spontaneous, almost impulsive, which was unlike his methodical approach to public appearances. I selected a navy dress that would photograph well and practiced my social smile in the bathroom mirror, preparing for another evening of deflecting praise toward Raymond's supposed genius while maintaining the gracious facade that had become second nature. The routine felt more exhausting now that I understood its true purpose, but the performance remained necessary until my legal preparations were complete. Saturday evening arrived with unusual warmth for late spring. I drove to our estate expecting to find the usual collection of business associates, potential investors, and society figures who populated Raymond's networking events. But the moment I stepped through our front door, something felt fundamentally wrong. The atmosphere was too jubilant, too personal. Raymond's friends and family had gathered in our living room with an excitement that seemed directed specifically at me rather than celebratory of any business achievement. Their conversations stopped when I entered, replaced by knowing glances and barely suppressed smiles that made my skin crawl. Rebecca approached immediately, her embrace lasting longer than usual while she whispered, "This is going to be such a memorable evening, Victoria. I hope you're ready for surprises." Her words carried an edge that made me step back and study her face more carefully. Rebecca had always treated me with barely concealed resentment, jealous of my close relationship with Raymond and resentful of our business success. But tonight, her expression held something that looked almost like anticipation, as if she was waiting for entertainment to begin. I moved through the crowd, greeting guests who responded with enthusiasm that felt performative. Everyone seemed to be acting in a play where I was the only person who hadn't received a script. Conversations felt forced, laughter came at strange moments, and people kept checking their watches as if waiting for a scheduled event to commence. Then I saw her. Sophia stood by the bar with a champagne flute in her hand and a smile that made my stomach turn. She surveyed the party with the proprietary air of someone who belonged, someone who had every right to be in my home among my husband's friends and family. Her body language screamed ownership as she nodded to guests who clearly knew exactly who she was and why she was there. The marketing director cover story evaporated instantly. Sophia wasn't here for business. She was here as Raymond's mistress, invited to witness whatever humiliation he had orchestrated for his wife. The realization hit me with such force that I had to steady myself against a nearby table. Every guest in the room knew. Their knowing glances, their suppressed laughter, their theatrical excitement, they were all part of a conspiracy designed to maximize my embarrassment. I had been invited to witness my own public execution, and everyone present had been given front row seats to enjoy the spectacle. Raymond appeared at my elbow, his hand settling possessively on my lower back in a gesture that had once felt protective but now felt like ownership. "Darling, you look stunning tonight. I'm so glad you could make it to our little celebration. What exactly are we celebrating?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "Patience," he said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "All will be revealed in due time." The catering staff began moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency, refilling glasses and preparing for what appeared to be a formal presentation. I noticed several guests positioning themselves for optimal viewing angles, their excitement building as 8:30 approached. At precisely 8:30, the staff wheeled out a cake from the kitchen. White frosting covered what appeared to be a 3-layer creation, elegant and expensive looking like everything else Raymond insisted upon for his public displays. But as the cake came closer, I could read the decorative script that adorned its surface. Finally free. The words were written in elegant cursive across the white frosting, each letter perfectly formed by a professional baker who had been commissioned to create this specific message. This wasn't a celebration cake. This was a declaration of independence, a public announcement that someone was being liberated from something they considered a burden. Rebecca stepped forward, raising her champagne flute with theatrical flourish. The room quieted as all attention focused on Raymond's sister, her face flushed with excitement and what looked suspiciously like malicious satisfaction. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room, "tonight we celebrate new beginnings and the courage to cut dead weight from our lives. Here's to freedom, to authentic happiness, and to finally living the life we deserve." Each word felt like a physical blow. The guests erupted in applause and laughter, their enthusiasm genuine now that the evening's true purpose had been revealed. I stood frozen among people I had considered family, understanding with crystalline clarity that they had gathered not to celebrate with me, but to celebrate my destruction. The cake had been commissioned specifically for this moment. Rebecca's toast had been rehearsed. Sophia's presence had been planned. Every detail of this evening represented careful orchestration designed to inflict maximum psychological damage while providing Raymond with witnesses to his supposed liberation from an unwanted marriage. Raymond moved toward me with the predatory grace of someone who believed he held all the power. In his hands was an elegantly wrapped gift box, the same cream-colored paper as the invitation tied with gold ribbon that matched the embossed lettering. He presented it to me with theatrical flourish, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Victoria, darling," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I have something special for you tonight. Consider this your graduation gift." My hands trembled slightly as I untied the ribbon, aware that every person in the room was watching my reaction. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, lay a stack of legal documents. Divorce papers. Already prepared, already filed, already stamped with official seals that made them legally binding. "Consider this your graduation from being a burden," Raymond announced, his words designed to echo Rebecca's toast while delivering maximum cruelty. The room erupted in laughter and applause, his friends and family celebrating his supposed wit while I stood holding documentation of my marriage's legal termination. The calculated nature of this public humiliation revealed itself completely. Raymond had orchestrated every detail to break my spirit in front of witnesses, ensuring that my destruction would be remembered by everyone who mattered in his social and professional circles. He positioned himself as the victim of a failed marriage rather than its destroyer, the successful businessman finally freed from dead weight that had been holding him back. But as I stared down at those divorce papers, something unexpected happened. Instead of the devastation Raymond had orchestrated this evening to produce, I felt something that surprised me. Liberation. Not the kind he was celebrating, but something far more profound and dangerous. Raymond had just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life, and he was too arrogant to recognize it. The divorce papers felt surprisingly light in my hands. Raymond stood before me with that satisfied expression he wore when closing profitable business deals, his eyes scanning the room to gauge audience reaction to his theatrical performance. He expected tears. He expected collapse. He expected the decorative wife he was discarding to crumble under the weight of public humiliation. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The practiced social mask I had worn for 3 years finally slipped away completely, revealing someone far more dangerous than the accommodating woman Raymond thought he was disposing of. The tears he had orchestrated this entire evening to produce never came. In their place, I felt a clarity so sharp it was almost physical. I looked down at the legal documents, noting the official seals and filing dates that proved Raymond had been planning this moment for weeks, possibly months. Every detail had been calculated for maximum psychological impact. The public setting. The witnesses. The cake with its cruel message. Even the timing, ensuring I would be caught completely off guard with no opportunity to prepare emotionally for what he intended as my destruction. But Raymond had made a fundamental error in judgment. He had assumed that humiliating me in front of his friends and family would break my spirit and leave me grateful for whatever settlement his missing prenuptial agreement might provide. What he failed to understand was that every witness to this evening's cruelty would remember his calculated meanness for the rest of their lives. I picked up a pen from the nearby side table and signed the divorce papers with hands that remained remarkably steady. Each signature felt like a declaration of war, though Raymond was too consumed with his own cleverness to recognize the danger in my cooperation. The room watched in fascination as I completed the paperwork that legally severed our marriage, their excitement building as they witnessed what they believed was Raymond's complete victory over his unwanted wife. "There," I said, setting down the pen and meeting Raymond's eyes directly. "Consider it done." My voice carried none of the emotion he had expected to hear. No pleading. No tears. No desperate attempts to salvage a relationship that had apparently been over long before this evening began. The guests murmured among themselves, perhaps surprised by my composure in the face of such deliberate cruelty. Raymond's expression flickered briefly with something that might have been confusion, but his triumph quickly reasserted itself. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this, Victoria. You always were practical." Practical. Even in his moment of supposed victory, he managed to diminish me one final time. The party continued around us, guests celebrating what they viewed as Raymond's liberation from an unwanted burden. I moved through the crowd accepting condolences and well wishes with the same grace I had always displayed at our social events. But internally I was calculating, planning, recognizing that Raymond had just provided me with the perfect opening to demonstrate exactly who had been the practical one in our marriage. As the evening progressed, I observed the dynamics that revealed themselves when people believed the entertainment was over. Sophia moved through the room with increasing confidence, no longer bothering to hide her relationship with Raymond or her plans for the future they would share. She discussed renovation ideas for their house with the casual ownership of someone who had already mentally moved in. Rebecca continued her performance as the supportive sister, offering commentary about Raymond's courage in ending an unsuccessful marriage and his wisdom in choosing to start fresh. Her words carried that particular venom reserved for women who resent other women's success, finally given permission to express feelings she had suppressed for years. Raymond's friends congratulated him on his business acumen, treating the dissolution of our marriage like another profitable transaction he had executed with characteristic precision. They spoke about his upcoming freedom to focus entirely on expanding the restaurant empire, apparently unaware that the empire they celebrated belonged entirely to the woman they were dismissing. The last guests departed around midnight, leaving behind champagne glasses and cake plates that testified to their celebration of my supposed downfall. Sophia and Raymond disappeared immediately into the master bedroom, their laughter echoing through the house as they began what I assumed was their own private celebration of the evening's success. I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the debris of the party that had been designed to mark my destruction. The silence felt profound after hours of orchestrated humiliation, giving me space to process the full extent of what Raymond had revealed about his character and intentions. The cruelty hadn't been spontaneous. This entire evening represented months of planning, coordination with family members and friends who had been recruited into his campaign of psychological warfare. Rebecca's toast hadn't been improvised. The cake message hadn't been a last-minute decision. Even the guest list had been carefully curated to include people whose presence would maximize my embarrassment while providing Raymond with the audience he needed for his performance. But as I analyzed the evening's events, I began to understand how significantly Raymond had miscalculated. His need for public vindication had led him to create witnesses to behavior that revealed his true character. Every person who had laughed at his cruel jokes would remember his calculated meanness. Every guest who had participated in celebrating my humiliation would eventually recognize that they had witnessed something ugly and deliberate. More importantly, Raymond had just legally terminated our marriage under circumstances that triggered every protection my father had insisted upon in that prenuptial agreement Raymond believed no longer existed. His public celebration of divorcing me, complete with witnesses and photographic evidence, had activated the very legal safeguards he thought he had eliminated. I reached for my phone and dialed Robert's number. My attorney answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Robert," I said, my voice carrying none of the emotion Raymond had expected to hear that evening, "it's time to execute our plan." The words felt powerful in ways I hadn't anticipated. For months, I had been playing the role of supportive wife while building the foundation for my independence. Tonight, Raymond had provided me with the legal justification and public documentation I needed to demonstrate exactly who had been the practical one in our partnership. "I'll begin filing the paperwork first thing Monday morning," Robert replied. "Are you certain you're ready for this?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." As I ended the call, my phone immediately began buzzing with incoming messages. Marcus Thompson had sent a text asking if I was all right, having heard through restaurant industry networks about the evening's events. Isabella Rodriguez left a voicemail offering whatever support I might need, her message conveying both professional respect and personal concern. Within hours of the party's conclusion, people who truly understood my capabilities were reaching out with offers of assistance. The contrast between their responses and the cruel laughter I had endured from Raymond's social circle revealed everything I needed to know about the relationships that actually mattered. My phone continued buzzing throughout the early morning hours as word spread through the professional networks I had cultivated during my months of strategic preparation. Suppliers who had worked with me directly. Industry professionals who respected my expertise. Business contacts who valued my judgment and innovation. These responses demonstrated something Raymond had never understood. While he had been focused on social appearances and networking events designed to enhance his public image, I had been building genuine professional relationships based on competence and mutual respect. The foundation of loyalty and expertise that these calls represented would support me through whatever confrontation was coming with my soon-to-be ex-husband. Raymond had celebrated what he believed was his victory over an unwanted wife. He had no idea that he had just declared war on someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment. As dawn broke over our estate, I realized that the woman who had signed those divorce papers in a room full of laughing strangers was already gone. In her place sat someone who understood the difference between being underestimated and being undervalued, someone ready to demonstrate that Raymond's empire had never belonged to him at all. Monday morning arrived with a symphony of legal machinery that had been months in the making. I sat in my kitchen with coffee and watched the sun rise, knowing that Raymond was still asleep upstairs beside Sophia, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse through channels he had never bothered to understand. Robert had worked through the weekend, coordinating with financial institutions and legal departments to ensure every document would be processed simultaneously. The original prenuptial agreement, bearing only Raymond's signature, provided the legal foundation for what would become the largest asset redistribution our state had witnessed in recent memory. At exactly 9 o'clock as Raymond's usual workday began, the first wave of notifications would arrive. Bank transfers executing automatically. Property deeds transferring ownership. Investment accounts changing hands with the efficiency that only comes from months of careful preparation and ironclad legal documentation. 65% of everything we had supposedly built together was moving to my name with brutal precision. The restaurants, the real estate investments, the portfolios Raymond had assembled using profits from the business empire I had actually created. Every asset he considered his personal wealth was disappearing into accounts he couldn't access, protected by legal structures he had never known existed. My phone buzzed with the first confirmation from Robert. Initial transfers complete. Bank accounts secured. Property transfers filed with county registrar. Investment accounts frozen pending redistribution. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned. I imagined Raymond's confusion when his usual morning routine was interrupted by bank officials and investment managers trying to explain why his accounts were suddenly inaccessible. The prenuptial agreement he had thought eliminated would be referenced in every conversation, its terms clear and unambiguous despite his certainty that such protections no longer existed. The second wave of devastation would arrive when Raymond attempted to conduct business as usual. Every innovation he claimed as his intellectual property had been legally protected under my name during the months I spent building my strategic foundation. Patent applications filed with documentation proving my creation dates preceded his public claims by substantial margins. Trademark registrations for signature recipes and proprietary management systems that made Victoria's Table profitable and distinctive. The unique food preparation techniques that attracted food critics and distinguished our restaurant from competitors belonged entirely to me through patent protections Raymond had never known were being filed. The signature wine pairings that earned critical acclaim and drove repeat customers were documented as my innovations, with email correspondence and development notes proving their origins. The sustainable sourcing programs that attracted environmentally conscious diners and generated positive media coverage were trademarked under my name with comprehensive documentation of their development process. Raymond would discover that his supposed intellectual property had vanished overnight, leaving him with claims to nothing more than empty restaurant spaces and borrowed concepts he could no longer legally use. Every system, every process, every innovation that made our business successful belonged to the woman he had just publicly humiliated and discarded. My second coffee was interrupted by a call from Isabella Rodriguez. "Victoria, the news is already spreading through industry networks. I wanted you to know that my consortium is prepared to move immediately on Raymond's remaining shares in Victoria's Table." The restaurant industry operated on relationships and reputation, both of which Raymond had systematically undervalued during his years of taking credit for work he hadn't contributed to creating. News of our divorce and the asset redistribution was traveling through professional networks with the speed that only comes from genuine interest in outcomes that affect respected colleagues. 3 separate investment groups have approached me about acquisition opportunities, Isabella continued. Raymond's 35% stake will be available at market value, but I suspect he'll be motivated to sell quickly once he understands his financial situation. Within 48 hours of the divorce party that was supposed to celebrate Raymond's liberation, his remaining ownership in the business we had built together would transfer to me through entirely legal channels he had never anticipated. His need for immediate liquidity to maintain his lifestyle would force him to accept whatever offers were available, and Isabella's consortium was positioned to acquire his shares and immediately transfer complete ownership to me. The irony was exquisite. Raymond had orchestrated a public celebration of discarding his supposedly burdensome wife, creating witnesses to behavior that justified every legal protection my father had insisted upon. His cruelty had activated the very safeguards he thought he had eliminated, while his arrogance had blinded him to the professional relationships that would complete his destruction. By noon, I was ready to return to Victoria's Table as its sole owner. The staff had been anxiously awaiting news about their future under new management, uncertain whether Raymond's divorce would affect their job security or working conditions. Their loyalty during months of strategic preparation had been invaluable, but I wanted them to understand that their support would be rewarded rather than taken for granted. I entered through the kitchen where Marcus Thompson was reviewing prep schedules with the line cooks. The conversation stopped when they noticed me, their faces reflecting concern about announcements that might affect their livelihoods. "I have news about the restaurant's ownership," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet kitchen. "As of this morning, I am the sole owner of Victoria's Table." The silence lasted several seconds before Marcus began applauding, his weathered hands creating a sound that echoed off the stainless steel surfaces around us. The applause spread through the kitchen as other staff members joined him, their relief palpable as they realized the person who had always understood and valued their contributions now controlled their workplace entirely. Several servers wiped away tears of joy, their emotional response revealing how concerned they had been about working under Raymond's complete control. They had witnessed his tendency to dismiss employee insights, his ignorance about operational details that affected their daily work, and his indifference to the professional development opportunities one had always tried to provide. "What does this mean for Mr. Raymond?" asked Patricia, our sommelier, her voice carrying curiosity rather than concern. "Mr. Raymond will need to find other opportunities," I replied. "His ownership stake in Victoria's Table has been transferred to investors who immediately assigned it to me." The kitchen staff exchanged glances that reflected years of frustration with Raymond's absent leadership and operational incompetence. They had protected the restaurant from his poor decisions while following my guidance, documenting his mistakes and maintaining the standards that kept our customers satisfied and loyal. Marcus stepped forward, his expression serious despite the celebratory atmosphere. "Mrs. Victoria, we want you to know that every person in this kitchen believes you are the reason this restaurant succeeds. We've always known who really built what we have here." His words carried the weight of collective experience, representing staff members who had watched me develop every aspect of our operation while Raymond claimed credit during public appearances and media interviews. Their validation felt more meaningful than any business award or industry recognition I had ever received. The afternoon brought a steady stream of phone calls from suppliers, industry professionals and business contacts who had heard about the ownership change and wanted to confirm their ongoing relationships with Victoria's Table. Each conversation reinforced my understanding that the professional network I had built during years of operational management belonged entirely to me rather than to the man who had worn the public face of our business. Raymond's absence from these relationship-building activities had created a vulnerability he never recognized. While he focused on networking events and industry conferences that enhanced his public image, I had been cultivating the operational relationships that actually sustained our business success. The suppliers who provided our ingredients knew me personally and trusted my judgment about quality standards. The service professionals who maintained our equipment had worked directly with me to ensure optimal performance. The marketing consultants who understood our brand positioning had developed their strategies based on conversations with me about customer experience goals and competitive differentiation. Raymond would discover that the business empire he thought he owned had always depended on relationships he had never bothered to build or maintain. His public persona as a successful restaurateur had been supported entirely by my operational expertise and professional network. As the day concluded, I sat in what was now my office, reviewing financial reports that documented the complete transformation of my circumstances. The woman who had signed divorce papers in a room full of laughing strangers had become the sole owner of a restaurant empire built on her own expertise and professional relationships. Raymond's calculated cruelty had provided the legal justification for everything that followed. His public celebration of discarding his burdensome wife had activated protections that transferred his wealth to the woman who had actually earned it through years of strategic thinking and operational excellence. The sound of Raymond's car in the parking lot reached me through my office window exactly 1 hour after my announcement to the staff. I had been expecting his arrival, knowing that someone would inevitably contact him about the ownership change and the celebration it had prompted among employees who had never shown such enthusiasm for his leadership. I watched through the security monitor as he stepped out of his BMW, his movements carrying the confident stride of a man who still believed he owned the building he was entering. His expression showed mild irritation rather than concern, suggesting he viewed this situation as a minor administrative problem that could be resolved through the charm and authority he had always relied upon to manage inconvenient complications. Raymond entered through the main dining room rather than the kitchen, a choice that reflected his preference for theatrical entrances over operational efficiency. He paused near the hostess station, surveying the restaurant with the proprietary air of someone conducting an inspection of his personal domain. The staff members who noticed his arrival continued their work without the deference he had grown accustomed to receiving. Marcus Thompson emerged from the kitchen, his expression neutral but alert as he approached Raymond near the bar area. Their conversation was brief, consisting primarily of Marcus explaining the ownership transfer and its immediate effects on restaurant operations. Raymond's face underwent a remarkable transformation during this exchange, cycling through disbelief, anger, and what appeared to be desperate calculation as the scope of his situation became clear. "Where is Victoria?" Raymond asked, his voice carrying an edge that suggested he was struggling to maintain composure. "I need to speak with her immediately about this misunderstanding." Marcus directed him toward my office, and within minutes Raymond was standing in the doorway, his carefully controlled expression barely containing the emotions churning beneath the surface. He had always prided himself on his ability to manage difficult conversations through strategic charm and calculated persuasion, but this situation clearly exceeded his usual repertoire of social manipulation techniques. "Victoria, we need to discuss this situation rationally," he began, his voice adopting the condescending tone he used when attempting to manage what he considered my emotional reactions to business decisions. "I understand you're upset about the divorce, but involving the restaurant in our personal problems isn't appropriate for either of us." I remained seated behind the desk that had become mine through legal channels he had never anticipated, allowing him to stand while I controlled the conversation's dynamics. "Please sit down, Raymond. We do indeed need to discuss the situation, though I suspect we have different perspectives on what requires clarification." He took the chair across from my desk, his posture rigid with barely controlled tension. "This restaurant represents my dream, my vision for what we could build together in the hospitality industry. You can't simply take away everything I've worked to create because you're angry about our marriage ending." The words hung in the air between us, carrying all the accumulated delusions Raymond had constructed about his role in our business success. I studied his face, noting the genuine conviction behind his claims, the absolute belief that the restaurant empire around us had originated with his vision rather than my expertise and operational management. "Raymond," I said, my voice carrying the same coldly factual tone I had perfected during months of strategic preparation, This restaurant was always my life's work. You served merely as the face I allowed to represent it publicly. The statement stripped away years of accumulated lies and false claims with surgical precision. Raymond's expression shifted from confident authority to something approaching panic as he confronted the reality that every aspect of our success had originated with my innovations rather than his supposed business acumen. "That's not true," he said, his voice rising slightly as he struggled to maintain the narrative that had sustained his professional identity. "I developed the concepts, I secured the financing, I built the relationships that made this place successful." "You secured financing based on business plans I created," I replied, retrieving a folder from my desk drawer that contained documentation proving my claims. "You built relationships with investors by presenting innovations I developed in the kitchen with Marcus and his team. Every menu item, every operational procedure, every customer service protocol originated with my work rather than your networking activities." I opened the folder and spread several documents across the desk surface, each one representing another piece of evidence that contradicted Raymond's version of our business history. Development notes in my handwriting. Email correspondence with suppliers that preceded his involvement by months. Training manuals I had written for staff members who had never received guidance from Raymond about operational standards. Raymond stared at the documents with growing comprehension that his professional identity had been built on foundations that belonged entirely to someone else. The revelation was destroying not only his current claims but his entire understanding of his own capabilities and contributions to our shared success. "The menu designs, the supplier relationships, the staff training programs," I continued. "All of these systems were created through my expertise and maintained through my daily involvement in operational management. You claimed credit for innovations you couldn't have conceived and took recognition for relationships you never bothered to build or maintain." His phone had been buzzing throughout our conversation, and he finally answered one of the incoming calls with obvious reluctance. The brief exchange I overheard confirmed what I had expected to happen. Sophia was calling to inform him that she would be unavailable for the immediate future, her tone carrying none of the warmth and support he had enjoyed during their months of planning his liberation from our marriage. Raymond ended the call with a stunned expression that revealed another layer of his psychological collapse. The woman who had celebrated his divorce and encouraged his cruel treatment of me was abandoning him the moment his wealth and status evaporated. Her opportunistic nature had been revealed by circumstances that stripped away the material advantages she had expected to inherit through their relationship. "Sophia won't be returning your calls," I observed, noting how quickly his romantic consolation prize had disappeared along with his financial resources. Relationships built on material advantage rarely survive the removal of those advantages. The observation seemed to complete his psychological destruction, removing his emotional support system just as the legal proceedings had eliminated his professional foundation. Raymond sat in the chair across from my desk, no longer the confident businessman who had orchestrated my public humiliation, but someone who was beginning to understand the true extent of his miscalculations. I reached into another desk drawer and withdrew an envelope that matched the elegant presentation style Raymond had used when delivering divorce papers at his celebration of my supposed destruction. The symmetry was intentional, designed to remind him of the theatrical cruelty he had displayed when he believed himself safely in control of our relationship's conclusion. "I have a proposition for you, Raymond," I said, placing the envelope on the desk between us. "Given your current financial situation and the legal complications surrounding your previous ownership claims, I'm prepared to offer you employment at Victoria's table." His expression shifted to something approaching disbelief as he processed the implications of my offer. "Employment? You're offering me a job at my own restaurant." "At what was never your restaurant," I corrected, maintaining the same condescending tone he had used when declaring my graduation from being a burden. "I'm offering you a position as assistant manager, reporting to Marcus Thompson, with responsibilities for basic operational tasks and customer service training." I slid the envelope across the desk surface, watching as he opened it to reveal an employment contract that specified his duties, salary, and reporting structure. The compensation was fair and the benefits adequate, but the role represented a complete reversal of the hierarchy he had assumed would always position him above the staff members he had previously dismissed as subordinates. "The salary will provide sufficient income to maintain a reasonable lifestyle," I continued, though obviously not at the level you became accustomed to when you were claiming credit for innovations that belonged to other people. Consider this professional development, an opportunity to finally learn the business you claim to understand. Raymond stared at the employment contract, his face reflecting the magnitude of his transformation from restaurant owner to entry-level employee. The man who had celebrated divorcing his burdensome wife was discovering that the burden had actually been carrying him throughout their marriage, supporting his lifestyle and reputation through expertise he had never bothered to develop himself. The choice before him was stark: accept employment under the supervision of staff members he had previously ignored, or face unemployment in an industry where his lack of genuine qualifications had been exposed through the collapse of his borrowed credibility. His hands trembled slightly as he held the contract, and I realized that Raymond was finally beginning to understand exactly who had been the practical one in our partnership. Raymond signed the employment contract with hands that trembled slightly, his signature a stark contrast to the confident flourishes that had once marked his business dealings. The transformation was complete, though neither of us fully understood its implications in that moment. What I thought would be the conclusion of my revenge was actually the beginning of something far more complex and ultimately more satisfying. My first action as sole owner involved restructuring the restaurant's management hierarchy to reflect the actual contributions people had been making for years. Marcus Thompson's promotion to executive chef and part owner represented more than a business decision. It acknowledged expertise that Raymond had systematically overlooked while taking credit for collaborative innovations that originated in our kitchen. "Marcus," I said during our first official meeting as business partners, "this ownership stake reflects your actual contributions to Victoria's Table's success. The menu development, the staff training, the quality standards that earned our reputation. These achievements deserve formal recognition." His weathered face showed emotion that he rarely displayed in professional settings. "Mrs. Victoria, I never expected this level of recognition. Mr. Raymond always made it clear that kitchen staff were employees, not partners." Patricia's elevation to beverage director carried similar significance. 4 years she had developed wine programs that earned critical acclaim while Raymond dismissed her expertise during investor meetings, claiming her selections were based on his guidance rather than her professional knowledge of varietals and food pairings. The servers who had memorized my seasonal menu rotations and wine recommendations received formal promotions that transformed them from order takers into certified sommelier assistants with career advancement opportunities. Their emotional responses revealed how long they had waited for acknowledgement of skills they had developed through dedication to standards Raymond never bothered to understand. These promotions created a workplace culture based on merit and actual contribution rather than hierarchy and borrowed authority. The staff meetings that followed my ownership transition felt fundamentally different from the presentations Raymond had conducted, where he distributed directives about procedures he hadn't developed while taking questions about systems he couldn't explain. But the most profound transformation involved Raymond himself. Within a week of signing his employment contract, he appeared for his first shift wearing the standard server's uniform that had been tailored to fit his measurements. The sight of him taking orders from customers who had previously known him as the restaurant's owner provided satisfaction that exceeded any financial victory I had achieved. Through the security monitors in my office, I occasionally watched him methodically cleaning tables and restocking supplies under Marcus's patient supervision. The irony was perfect. Raymond was finally learning the fundamentals of restaurant operations, understanding for the first time how the business he had claimed to master actually functioned on a practical level. Marcus proved to be an excellent supervisor, treating Raymond with professional courtesy while ensuring he understood that competent performance was required rather than assumed. Their interactions revealed the difference between earned authority and borrowed status. Marcus commanded respect through demonstrated expertise, while Raymond was discovering what it meant to build credibility through daily contribution rather than public appearance. "How is our newest team member adapting to his responsibilities?" I asked Marcus during one of our weekly operational reviews. "He's learning," Marcus replied diplomatically. "The transition from claiming expertise to developing actual skills requires significant adjustment, but he's showing improvement in basic service protocols." The customers who recognized Raymond from his previous role as owner displayed reactions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed amusement. Some requested different servers, uncomfortable with the awkwardness of being served by someone they had known in a position of authority. Others seemed to enjoy the novelty of the reverse dynamic, though Raymond handled these interactions with more grace than I had expected. His uniform transformation represented poetic justice in its purest form. Raymond was experiencing the same invisibility and dismissal he had imposed on others, while learning what genuine contribution felt like for the first time in his professional career. The man who had systematically taken credit for other people's work was finally creating value through his own efforts, however modest those efforts might be. 6 months after Raymond's employment began, Victoria's Table received notification of its first James Beard Award nomination. The recognition specifically acknowledged innovation in sustainable dining practices, citing our commitment to local sourcing and zero-waste preparation techniques that I had pioneered during the years when Raymond was claiming credit for environmental initiatives he couldn't have conceived or implemented. The nomination letter mentioned specific programs I had developed with local farmers and waste management systems I had designed to minimize our environmental impact. These innovations had been attributed to Raymond's leadership during the years when he was presenting my work as his vision. But the James Beard Foundation's research had identified the true origins of our sustainable practices. Reading that nomination letter provided vindication that extended beyond personal satisfaction. Professional recognition from the industry's most respected organization validated expertise that had been invisible during my marriage while demonstrating that the restaurant's true potential could only be realized under acknowledged leadership. The nomination ceremony took place at a downtown hotel, with restaurant industry professionals gathered to celebrate innovations that advanced culinary arts and hospitality standards. I attended as Victoria's Table's owner and creative director, accompanied by Marcus Thompson as executive chef and Patricia as beverage director. Our table represented authentic collaboration rather than borrowed authority. Raymond remained at the restaurant that evening, working his scheduled shift under the supervision of our assistant manager. The symmetry was perfect. While I was receiving recognition for innovations I had actually created, he was learning basic operational tasks that he had never bothered to master during the years when he claimed ownership of our success. The award itself was less important than what it represented. The James Beard nomination acknowledged that Victoria's Table had achieved its full potential only after acknowledging the true sources of its innovation and expertise. The restaurant industry was recognizing excellence that had always existed but had been obscured by false claims and borrowed credibility. Standing in my office later that week, reviewing expansion plans for 3 additional locations, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who had signed divorce papers in a room full of laughing strangers had been replaced by someone who understood the difference between being underestimated and being undervalued. My revenge had never been about destruction, though I hadn't fully understood that at the beginning. It had been about revelation, about proving that everything Raymond thought he possessed had been an illusion from the start. The empire he believed he was losing had never belonged to him. I had simply reclaimed what was mine and finally stepped into the recognition I had always deserved. Through the security monitor, I caught a glimpse of Raymond restocking wine glasses in the dining room, his movements careful and methodical as he learned proper techniques from staff members who had once deferred to his presence. He was finally contributing something genuine to the operation, though his contributions were necessarily modest given his limited understanding of restaurant fundamentals. The irony wasn't lost on me. Raymond's employment at Victoria's Table represented his first honest work in the hospitality industry. For years he had claimed credit for innovations he couldn't replicate and taken recognition for relationships he hadn't built. Now he was learning what actual contribution felt like, discovering the satisfaction that comes from earning recognition rather than borrowing it. Our expansion plans would create opportunities for staff members who had demonstrated genuine expertise while providing platforms for innovations that originated with real understanding rather than theoretical knowledge. The restaurant empire would continue growing under authentic leadership, supported by people who understood the difference between performance and competence. My greatest victory wasn't taking everything from my opponent. It was demonstrating that nothing he claimed had ever truly belonged to him in the first place. If this story of calculated justice had you captivated from beginning to end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Victoria signed those divorce papers with steady hands, transforming Raymond's intended humiliation into her declaration of war. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of triumph and transformation. subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.